I'm concerned about bringing to you the very essence of the life of our blessed Lord. And I want to show to you how he took upon himself, or transferred to himself, three different areas of our lives. There was physical transference, there was mental transference, and there was moral transference. He took upon himself all of our burdens and responsibilities, physical, mental, moral. He took them totally and completely. He's a God, in other words, who took his own medicine. He gave us freedom. We brought a number of ills upon ourselves, and he came and took the effects of that freedom. I can remember when I was a boy, and all of you who are over 39 can thank God that you never lived in what was known as the castor oil period of life. But my grandmother used to give me castor oil, and before she would give it to me, she would take it herself and say, "See, there's nothing to it, it's easy." She was taking her own medicine. God does that. So let us see how he took his own medicine physically. As a result of the evil in this world and abuse of freedom, we have all kinds of disease and sickness. We read in the Gospel of Matthew a prophecy taken from Isaiah that our blessed Lord took upon himself our sicknesses and our illnesses. We have no reason to believe that our blessed Lord was ever physically sick, because it seems as if no one had any power over him until he said, "All right, this is your hour," to evil. They could not arrest him, they could not throw him over the precipice. So it's not likely that he was ever physically sick. How then did he take upon himself our sicknesses and our illnesses? I think by what might be called a very deep empathy. There isn't a mother in this audience or on television who, having had a sick child, has not said, "I would like to take on the sufferings of that child." Any one of you mothers that has a delinquent daughter or a delinquent son suffers more for that son than the son suffers. Why? Because you're identified with that child. So our blessed Lord, therefore, I feel by empathy, felt all the sicknesses of the world. When, for example, he touched the blind man, I'm sure that he felt all the blindness of the universe. He felt the blindness, for example, of a Milton. All the lights of the world went out. And when he touched the deaf man, I'm sure that he felt all the harmonies of the world to cease. He felt the deafness of a Beethoven. When he touched the leper, and he touched the leper, I'm sure he felt leprosy. And that is one of the reasons why we find often that when our blessed Lord healed the sick, that he sighed, he groaned, he wept. He transferred to himself all sicknesses, lameness, and the ills to which mankind is heir to, in order that we could never say, God does not know what it is to suffer. He had it before. He took his own medicine. Then there was mental transference. Who is going to give sympathy, for example, to the mentally retarded? Does God know anything about the mentally handicapped? Then the agnostics, the skeptics, the doubters, those who have lost their faith. Does God know anything, for example, about the despair of a Sartre or a Camus or anyone who has given up the shade and shadow of the cross for any kind of self-imposed guilt? God knows all about that, and he transferred all of those illnesses to himself. And in one dark moment, when he was unfurled on a cross like a wounded eagle, the sun refused to shed its light upon the crime of deicide. Nature is not always sympathetic to our moods, but it was sympathetic to his. And in that darkness at midday, he took upon himself all of the mentally handicapped and all the doubts and despairs and anxieties of people, and expressed them all in one great moment of transference. My God, why? Why? Why hast thou abandoned me? It was the moment when God asked a why of God. It was the second when Christ was at the very gates of hell itself. He took his own medicine. And that is why the despairing need never despair, and the hopeless need ever be without hope. He took on their hatred, their atheism. He felt it as if it were his own. And in that moment, he redeemed all of the skepticism of the universe. And then there came one other moment. It was a bigger one, in which there was not physical transference of ills, not a mental transference, but a moral transference of guilt. We're all sinners. We have a tendency to project our guilt. We blame it onto other people. Blame it onto God, we blame it on the church, we blame it on the government, we blame it on neighbors. So there's a tremendous pile of garbage someplace in this world. And all of that guilt that we have projected, he had to take upon himself to clear it out. Believe me, the only pollution that is in this world is not in the atmosphere. There's a moral pollution that is far worse. And that he took upon himself in his death. And he took all sins upon himself as if he himself were guilty. And that was why, for example, when in the courtroom of Annas he was accused of being a blasphemy, he did not answer because we have blasphemed. 7 times he spoke before Pilate, 7 times he was silent. 7 times he spoke as shepherd, 7 times he was silent as the sheep, the victim lamb that had to be sacrificed for the sins of the world. And so any sin that we have ever committed, of mind or heart or body, he took upon himself and paid the debt as if it were his own. This was the greatest of all of his acts of transference. And then when he rose from the dead, Then he made it possible for us to say, well, now I'm forgiven. He's conquered all of this evil. And we give ourselves completely and totally to him. So gather up then, if you please, all of the ills that have afflicted mankind. He bore them all on a tree. Think as if mankind were today afflicted by a plague. And suppose this plague was like the Black Death that destroyed over 1/3 the population of Europe at the close of the Middle Ages. Suppose some great scientist here in California developed a cure for the plague, and he made it available for everyone. Would we go? There would be some who would say, well, how do I know he's got a cure? Why should I bother going to a laboratory? I can take care of myself in my own home. And so we would die of the plague. And that's the way it is with the cross of Christ. He has the remedy for resignation to his will in physical and mental suffering. He has the remedy for sin, forgiveness at the cross. And all who come to him are healed. The looking at Christ on the cross. Remember when the the Israelites crossing the desert were bitten by poisonous serpents, and God said to Moses, make a serpent of brass that looks just exactly like that serpent, and hang it up on the crotch of a tree. And everyone who looks at that serpent on the crotch of that tree will be healed of the snake bite. Now that's crazy. There's nothing that will cure a snake bite by looking at a brass serpent. But it was a type of something else. And later on, when our blessed Lord came, he had a conversation with Nicodemus, and he said to Nicodemus, as Moses lifted up the serpent of brass on the tree, so must the Son of Man be lifted up on the cross. When our blessed Lord was lifted up on that cross, he was like that brass serpent. That brass serpent had no poison in it. But the serpent looked as if it were poison. When Christ was on the cross, he looked as if he were guilty because he bore all of our sins. But there was no more guilt or sin in him than there was poison in that serpent. And all who look upon him are healed. This is the saving Christ.